Now to make our raspberry mead, I'll be using the following. I have 2 pounds of fresh raspberries. You can use fresh, you can use frozen, it's entirely up to you. I'm going to be using 3 pounds of orange blossom honey. I'm going to be using half a teaspoon of Red Star Premier Rouge wine yeast, for no other reason than the fact that I still have a lot of this that I have to get through. Might as well use them now. Again, if you don't have wine yeast, bread yeast still works. Speaking of bread yeast, we're going to be using half a teaspoon of active dry regular yeast, and this is going to act as our yeast and nutrient to our wine yeast. And of course, if you don't have wine yeast and you'll be using bread yeast instead, it will act as a yeast nutrient to your bread yeast. I'll be using a couple of straining bags. You should have a gallon ready of clean filtered water. We're going to need a wide mouth fermenter to do our primary fermentation in, or any container that has a nice wide mouth. Now, of course, if you don't have a nice stylish fermenter, you can still use a bucket. It's got a wide mouth opening and that's all you really need. Of course, you will need an airlock with Blanc for that as well. It would be helpful to have a 1 gallon or 4 liter, depending on what part of the world you're from, to do our secondary fermentation in later on. We are going to need an airlock with Blanc. This particular airlock is using a number 6 bung, which fits a lot of 1 gallon, 4 liter containers. I'm going to be using an 8-quart pot. It would be nice to have a hydrometer with testing tube to help us determine what our alcoholic content is going to be at the end, or if any problems develop along the way. And using your appropriate food grade sanitizer of choice, we want to make sure that all of our equipment has been properly cleaned and sanitized. And that's what I'm going to be using to make this raspberry mead. Now, to help our honey pour out of the bottles that much more easier, we're going to go ahead and first of all remove the inner seal. Oh, that one came off. Oh, yeah. All right. Move the inner seal, put our cap back on, and we're going to put this in hot water. I mean, it's not scalding hot. It's not boiling hot. It's not going to melt the plastic, but we just want to get it in there just to warm it up a bit. And let's let that do its thing. Now, since we don't know what's done what on these berries, let's go ahead and give these bad boys a good quick rinse. And now let's go ahead and get these into straining bags. Getting as many of the berries in the bags as possible. It's not really all that much. I think I could get by with just 1 bag. All right, go ahead and tie this off. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and pour in about half of our water. More or less. And put our lid back on. Let's bring this up to a boil. Now with our water come up to a nice good rolling boil, let's do a couple of things. One, let's take half a teaspoon of our bread yeast and let's go ahead and pour that in. And then next thing we're going to do is turn off the heat. Take our berries, drop those in, and let's put our lid back on. Now, again, the purpose of putting in our bread yeast while the water is now boiling hot is that we want to try and kill off the bread yeast. And the reason we want to do that is because dead bread yeast cells act as a yeast nutrient for our wine yeast, or if we're using bread yeast for fermentation later on, it will act as a yeast nutrient for that yeast as well. But in order for that to happen, the yeast has to be dead at this point here. So we're just going to let this come down a little bit in temperature, and then we're going to go ahead and add in our honey. Okay, while our water is still hot, let's go ahead and begin incorporating our honey. And with a freshly sanitized spoon, go ahead and mix that in. And yes, I am going to go back off camera, and I am going to make sure I get as much of this honey into the pot as possible. One last good little stir. It's okay to mash down on the berries if you like. We'll be doing that again later on. Let's go ahead and put our lid back on, and let's let this come down to room temperature. Now that we've had a chance to let our juice mixture come down to room temperature, actually I just let it sit overnight, we're going to go ahead and do the following. One, we're going to go ahead and remove temporarily our straining bag. And it's okay to squeeze on this bag for a moment, because we want to try and get a little bit of that juice out of there. And let's just set that aside for a moment. Next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and transfer our juice into our fermenter. Which, by the way, standing behind the camera trying to do this is not as easy as it seems. Now, the reason why we took the bag out is because we want to go ahead and bring our measure up to at least 1 gallon using the water that we saved from the day before. I've got a mark in my fermenter which lets me know how much is 1 gallon's worth, which is about there. With that having been done, I'm going to go ahead and put our straining bag back into our fermenter, along with any residual juice that might have come out. And for the moment, let's go ahead and put our cap on. Now, the next thing that I want to do is that I want to take a hydrometer reading. And the hydrometer reading is going to let me know basically how much sugar is in our starting mix. And then at the end of the process, we take another reading and find out how much sugar is left before a simple little calculation, and that will determine how much alcohol by volume we have created in this wine. And it looks as though our starting gravity is coming in at 1.108. Now, since we have the opportunity, let us do the following. Let us go ahead and, with a freshly sanitized spoon, let's go ahead and aerate our juice mixture really, really good. And the purpose of this is that when we add our yeast, yeast needs not only sugars to consume, but also oxygen. And this will help give it a little bit of a good start. Now, ideally, you should do this at least once a day for the next 3 days. But we know how life gets in the way, so giving you a good stir, at least initially, will help. I would suggest perhaps 2 or 3 minutes of doing this, but I'm not going to sit here and stir this for 2 or 3 minutes on camera because we all have much better things to do with our time. All right, that having been done for the moment, let's go ahead and put our lid back on. And now let's go ahead and add in our yeast. All right, let's go ahead and take our lid off. And again, I'm using half a teaspoon of Red Star Premier Rouge wine yeast. And if you don't have that or something that you prefer to use instead, you can always use Brit yeast and we'll still get pretty decent results. Go ahead and sprinkle that on top. Put a lid back on. And while I'm here, I may as well point out that this airlock does, yeah, right. This fermenter does have its own built-in airlock, so that as the yeast consumes the sugars, it produces an oxygen and produces CO2. The CO2 has to have a means of escape, and this airlock will allow it to do just that. Now, if your fermenter does not have a built-in airlock, you will need a standard airlock. And once again, this is just a regular bubbler type airlock with a number 6 bung on the end of it. Now, the next thing we want to do is that we want to go ahead and label our creation. We are making, next time I'll do better with this tape. We are making a Raspberry Mead. We started it on this date, and our original gravity reading was 1.108. This gives us basic information to let us know over the next several months just what it is we're making when we started it. And we need a starting gravity number to compare that against the ending gravity number to determine our alcohol by volume level. And this is just basic information that we need later on. Okay, now that we've started the process of making this mead, what happens next? Well, for the next 5 days, we're going to go ahead and let the straining bag stay in the fermenter, releasing as much of the flavorful raspberry flavor as possible. Then we're going to go ahead and remove it because it's done its all and we no longer need it. At the same time, at the end of that process, we're going to go ahead and transfer our mead from our primary fermenter into our secondary fermenter, which was the glass jug that you saw at the beginning of the video. And periodically, every 2 or 3 months or so, we're going to go ahead and rack it from that container into another until we feel that the wine has basically gotten as clear as it's going to, and there's very little sediment remaining at the bottom of the carboy. Now then, that describes the process of racking. At the end of the racking process, when we're ready, we're going to go ahead and degas it if necessary. We're going to go ahead and back sweeten it if necessary. We're going to go ahead and pasteurize it. We're going to go ahead, if necessary, we're going to go ahead and bottle it, label it, cork it, and whole 9 yards. All of these I have as standalone videos that you can find in my winemaking operations playlist on my channel page, at which point I hope you will take the time to subscribe and or become a member and or become a Patreon and help support this channel out. So the next time we see this mead will be in about 12 months' time when I do the 12-month tasting video. So until then, I'll see you.